What do you see when you look at the people around you? Their smiles, their eyes, their gestures. Do you see truth, or do you see masks? Schopenhauer once dared to say something that still makes people uncomfortable, something that burns with controversy even today. He suggested that the very nature of women, what they desire, what they seek, and what they reflect, was not what society pretends it to be. His words were not gentle, not flattering, but piercing like a blade cutting through illusion. And whether you agree with him or not, his message carries an echo we cannot ignore. How much of what we believe about love, gender, and human nature is built on lies? This is not about blaming. It is not about bitterness. It is about confronting the shadow that hides beneath our ideals, so we can learn to walk into the light with open eyes. The uncomfortable truth is this: if you chase illusions, they will break you. If you give your soul to a false promise, it will hollow you. Schopenhauer was not telling us to hate, but to wake up, to see clearly what we often refuse to see. And the real question is, are you brave enough to face that truth? Schopenhauer's reflections on women were not meant as sweet poetry, but as sharp observations about human nature, and it is precisely this sharpness that makes them controversial. He stripped away the romantic veneer that societies have long wrapped around the idea of love and attraction, suggesting instead that what appears noble or eternal is often rooted in something far more primal. At the heart of his argument was the idea that much of what draws men and women together is not spiritual destiny but biological necessity, a drive for survival disguised as affection. In a world that loves to glorify love as transcendent, his words sting like ice water against the face, waking us to a possibility we do not want to admit. Perhaps most of what we call love is less about who we are and more about what we can provide. It is this stripping away of illusion that creates the tension, because the mind wants beauty, but reality often reveals pragmatism, and the clash between the two produces pain. Consider how societies frame romance in stories, films, and traditions. Love is eternal, love conquers all, love is selfless. These messages condition us from childhood to believe that once we find someone who touches our heart, we will be cherished for our soul, independent of circumstance. Yet reality repeatedly tells a different story, one that Schopenhauer emphasized with brutal honesty. When a man loses his wealth or his status, the affection he once received may begin to wane. When beauty fades, when health declines, when power diminishes, the supposed eternal devotion can vanish with alarming speed. This contradiction between the ideal and the real creates a conflict that echoes within us. We want to believe in transcendent loyalty, yet human beings often reveal that much of their attachment is contingent upon conditions. The myth tells us of unconditional love. Experience shows us the conditions are written in invisible ink. The conflict becomes sharper when we realize that illusions are not just external but internal. We do not only absorb lies from culture, we also create them ourselves. Projecting fantasies onto the people we desire, we dress them in the clothing of perfection. We see in them virtues they do not possess, and we convince ourselves that they love us purely for who we are. Schopenhauer believed this self-deception was one of humanity's great flaws, that we willingly blind ourselves to the truth because the truth is too heavy to bear. To admit that someone's devotion may depend on our usefulness or power is to admit vulnerability and fragility. Thus we cling to illusions because they protect us from despair. Yet, like fragile glass, illusions eventually shatter. And when they do, the pain of betrayal is not merely the pain of losing another. It is the pain of losing the story we told ourselves. That double loss, both external and internal, is what makes the conflict so devastating. At its core, the controversy surrounding Schopenhauer's claim is that it challenges our deepest longing, the desire to be loved unconditionally. To tell someone that they are valued not for their soul but for their resources, status, or appearance is to strike at the very foundation of their worth. And yet, how many times have we witnessed relationships that collapse as soon as those external anchors disappear? How many friendships dissolve when opportunity fades? How many romances die when beauty withers or when money dries up? The pattern is visible everywhere, and it echoes precisely what Schopenhauer insisted. The controversy lies in our resistance to acknowledge it, because to acknowledge it means to accept that we may never receive the kind of love we long for. This is not an attack on women alone, as some mistakenly interpret, but a reflection of human selfishness on a broader scale, applied specifically to the dynamics between the sexes. The conflict does not stop at personal relationships. It bleeds into society's entire structure. Advertising, media, and culture thrive on perpetuating illusions of eternal romance and unconditional acceptance. Stories sell better when they promise us something transcendent. Fairy tales end with happily ever after, never with until the money ran out, or until beauty faded. These narratives comfort us but also set us up for disappointment when reality fails to match the script. Schopenhauer's message stands as a rebellion against such comforting lies, insisting that the truth, however harsh, is more valuable than the illusion. This is why his perspective provokes anger, because it dismantles the dream industry, the fantasy that keeps people hoping for what may never exist. He was accused of cynicism, yet his observations only mirrored the world's behavior. When masks fall away, the conflict between what is sold to us and what we experience remains a wound that many would rather cover than confront. At the individual level, this conflict manifests in heartbreak. When someone realizes they were loved not for their essence, but for their circumstances, a deep disillusionment takes hold. They begin to question every smile, every promise, every tender moment. Was it real, or was it strategy? Did they love me, or did they love what I could offer? This suspicion corrodes the heart, and in many cases it turns into bitterness. Schopenhauer warned that such bitterness should not be mistaken for enlightenment, for the danger lies in swinging to extremes, either blind idealism or hard cynicism. Yet the conflict remains unresolved, because the longing for unconditional acceptance is so strong that even those who have been betrayed often return to illusions, seeking again what reality has denied them. Thus human beings move in cycles, oscillating between hope and despair, illusion and awakening, always caught between what they desire and what exists. What makes this conflict even more pressing is that it forces us to reconsider the very definition of love. If much of what we call love is bound to conditions, beauty, strength, security, then perhaps love as we dream of it does not exist in the way we imagine. Perhaps it is not unconditional devotion, but a negotiation of needs dressed in poetic words. To accept this is painful, because it reduces something sacred to something transactional. And yet, refusing to accept it leaves us vulnerable to constant heartbreak. This is why Schopenhauer's reflections continue to provoke outrage. They force us to look at love without its costume, naked in its fragility. The conflict is not only between men and women, but between the dream of permanence and the reality of impermanence, between the craving for eternity and the truth of change. And while many resist this truth, the evidence continues to whisper to us, through every failed promise, every fading romance, every silence that follows when illusions die. Think back to the moment when you gave everything to someone you trusted. You placed your heart in their hands, confident that they would value the sincerity behind it, yet slowly you discovered that their appreciation of you was filtered through conditions you did not know existed. Perhaps it was unspoken expectations about your success, your strength, or your ability to provide. Perhaps it was your appearance, the way you fit into their image of what a partner should be. In the beginning, it felt like love, pure, unconditional, unwavering. But as life shifted and circumstances changed, you realized the foundation was not built on who you truly were, but on what you symbolized for them. This realization is painful, because it does not only question the person you loved, it questions the very meaning of the relationship you shared, forcing you to confront that what you thought was devotion may have only been a transaction in disguise. There are moments in life when you begin to see patterns repeating, not just in your story, but in the lives of those around you. Friends who were abandoned when their careers faltered, families torn apart when beauty faded or health weakened, lovers who once promised eternity but disappeared when conditions grew difficult. These are not isolated tragedies, but echoes of a larger truth. Much of what we call love is conditional. It thrives when circumstances are favorable, but it withers when tested by hardship. And this is where the most profound disillusionment occurs, not in the loss itself, but in the realization that the love you believed in could not survive the storm. You are left asking, did they ever love me at all, or did they only love what I could offer at my peak? That question lingers like a ghost, haunting even the strongest heart, and blinding even the strongest light. She said something to him, It is not only romantic relationships that reveal this truth. Friendships, too, often wear the same mask. People surround you when your light shines brightly, when you can give, entertain, or elevate them. But when your world darkens, when silence replaces laughter and scars replace smiles, many disappear. The same hands that once clapped for you grow still. The same words that once praised you grow silent. And this silence teaches you more than any declaration of love ever could. It teaches you that the crowd does not love you. They love how you make them feel. They love what you bring into their lives. But when you no longer provide that glow, they seek it elsewhere. This is a harsh realization because it strips away the comfort of believing you were valued simply for existing. Instead, it reminds you that human loyalty is fragile, easily swayed by circumstances beyond your control. The betrayal cuts deeper when it comes from someone who once swore they saw your soul. To be loved for the mask you wear is one thing, but to be convinced someone saw beneath it, only to realize they never truly did, that is another wound entirely. You thought they cherished the scars, the fears, the insecurities, yet when those surfaced, their affection diminished. You wanted to believe in a love that embraced all of you, the strong and the broken, the beautiful and the wounded. Instead, you discovered that the love they offered had boundaries, invisible lines you crossed without knowing. The devastation is not just in losing them, but in losing the belief that someone could accept you fully. This moment of disillusionment is a breaking point for many, a collapse of trust, not just in others, but in the very idea of unconditional love itself. And yet, within this pain, there is a strange kind of awakening. The scars of disappointment carry with them a lesson, though it often takes years to recognize it. You begin to see that the longing for unconditional acceptance is not wrong, but the expectation that it will come from others may be misplaced. You remember the times you begged silently for someone to stay, to see you, to choose you without conditions. You remember how powerless that begging made you feel, how small it rendered your worth. Slowly, you realize that such desperation comes from placing your value entirely in the hands of another, a dangerous gamble where your identity lives or dies based on their decision. And it dawns on you, perhaps the acceptance you seek must begin within, not without. This realization does not erase the pain of the past, but it begins to transform how you carry it. You start noticing the patterns more clearly, understanding that the world often loves conditionally, and instead of fighting this truth, you adapt to it. You no longer give your heart blindly, expecting others to treasure it simply because it is yours. You observe actions instead of being seduced by words. You measure consistency instead of promises. You begin to build a quiet resilience, one that no longer shatters when illusions fall apart. This is not cynicism, though it may look like it from the outside. It is wisdom born from scars, a survival instinct that grows into strength. You realize that illusions break, but you do not have to break with them. The most relatable experience of all is perhaps this: the moment you stop waiting for someone else to validate your worth. At first, it feels lonely, like standing in an empty room where no one applauds, no one whispers promises, no one holds your hand. But over time, that room becomes peaceful, and in the quiet, you begin to hear something you had silenced for too long: your own voice. You discover that the approval you chased was a shadow, and the light was always within you. This does not mean you stop loving or stop hoping, but it means you love with clarity instead of illusion. You hope with awareness instead of blindness, and in this clarity, the betrayals of the past begin to feel less like curses and more like teachers, guiding you to an awakening you could never have reached without them. There comes a point when exhaustion replaces anger. You stop rehearsing the betrayals in your mind, stop replaying the words that cut you, stop feeding the bitterness that once gave you strength. The silence that follows is unsettling at first, because for so long the noise of disappointment was the rhythm of your thoughts. But as you sit within that silence, something begins to shift. You notice that pain no longer screams as loudly, that the wounds no longer demand constant attention. Instead, they begin to whisper, and in those whispers you find something you had been missing all along: perspective. The world may not offer unconditional acceptance, but your ability to endure, to see clearly, and to choose differently reveals itself in the quiet. The awakening does not arrive as fireworks. It comes as a slow dawn, a light spreading gently through the darkness. This awakening teaches you that solitude is not punishment but a teacher. For the first time, you are forced to face yourself without the noise of validation, without the crutch of someone else's affection. At first, solitude feels like a wound. You ache for voices to fill the silence, for someone to remind you that you matter. Yet the longer you remain there, the more you realize that solitude is not emptiness but space. Space for reflection, for healing, for discovery. You begin to see that much of your suffering came not from being alone, but from fearing it. Once the fear dissolves, solitude transforms into sanctuary, and you realize that no one can take this sanctuary from you unless you hand it over willingly. This is where strength begins to root itself quietly within you. The imagery of scars takes on new meaning during this awakening. In the past, you may have seen your scars as evidence of failure, marks of weakness that proved you were not worthy of lasting love. But as the light of understanding grows, those scars transform. They are no longer signs of defeat, but symbols of survival. Proof that you endured what could have destroyed you. Each scar tells a story of betrayal overcome, of illusion shattered yet not fatal, of nights spent in pain that ended in mornings still rising. They are not stains but maps, guiding you back to yourself. And in embracing them, you stop apologizing for your wounds. You begin to wear them openly, not as trophies of pride, but as quiet testaments to the strength you did not know you had. There is also a deep liberation in realizing that your worth is no longer tied to being chosen. The chains of needing approval begin to fall away. For so long you might have lived waiting for someone else to confirm your value, to say you were enough, to declare you worthy of love. But the awakening arrives when you recognize that no one's validation can permanently anchor your sense of self. It may soothe you briefly, like a drug, but it cannot sustain you. Only your own recognition of your worth can do that. And so you stop bargaining for affection, stop begging for presence, stop giving away your soul in hopes of being accepted. Instead, you sit in the quiet and tell yourself the words you long to hear from others. I am enough. And this time, the words feel real, because they come from the only voice that cannot abandon you. The imagery of light becomes powerful here. You recognize that the world will always contain shadows, illusions, and disappointments, but within you exists a flame that remains untouched by them. It flickers sometimes, yes, but it never extinguishes. When relationships collapse, when approval fades, when the world grows cold, that flame persists. Awakening is the moment you learn to see that flame clearly, to protect it without apology, and to trust it when everything external crumbles. You no longer chase light in others with desperation, because you know you carry your own. And paradoxically, this recognition allows you to love more authentically. You love not from need, not from fear, not from illusion, but from freedom. You can give without being emptied, and you can receive without becoming enslaved. Awakening is not about rejecting love or connection. It is about reframing them. You stop seeing relationships as the foundation of your identity and start seeing them as choices you can make from a place of fullness. You understand that true intimacy cannot exist when it is burdened by dependency, and that the most sacred bond is not one where two people complete each other, but one where they meet whole and walk together freely. This changes everything. It allows you to approach others without clinging, to admire without possession, to care without fear of loss. The awakening liberates you from the illusion that you must sacrifice your soul to keep someone beside you. Instead, you learn to stand alone with strength, and from that position, to invite others to join you in the light. The awakening culminates in a profound stillness. It is not dramatic, it is not loud, and it does not demand recognition. It feels like standing in a vast field at dawn, the air crisp, the horizon glowing softly, and the world quiet for a moment. In that stillness, you no longer fear what may leave you or what may fail you, because you are rooted in something deeper. The noise of betrayal becomes background, the illusions of culture lose their power, and the desperate longing for approval dissolves like mist in the morning sun. You feel yourself, whole and unshaken, carrying scars like constellations and silence like music. And it is here, in this quiet clarity, that the awakening reveals itself not as an ending, but as the beginning of a new way of being, stronger, freer, and untouchable by illusions. Schopenhauer's words, though cloaked in controversy, leave behind a message that echoes more as a mirror than a command. Do not lose yourself in illusions. Life will always tempt you to believe in masks, to confuse attraction for love, to measure your value in the eyes of those who may only see what you can provide. But when the illusions fall away, as they always do, you are left with the bare truth of who you are. This realization, though heavy, can be liberating because it shifts your gaze from outward validation to inward strength. The real revolution does not lie in demanding that the world treat you differently, but in refusing to be deceived by appearances. You awaken to the truth that you cannot control the desires or illusions of others, but you can control whether you hand your soul over to them. This is the heart of transformation, not bitterness, not rejection of love, but clarity and the courage to live from it. As you reflect on the scars left behind by betrayal or abandonment, you begin to see them not as disfigurements, but as teachers. They taught you where not to place your worth, whom not to trust with your heart, and how to distinguish real devotion from fleeting fascination. The revolution Schopenhauer hinted at is not in fighting others for their recognition, but in transforming the way you perceive yourself. To live authentically, you must accept that some will only ever love you for your circumstances, while others may never truly see you at all. Yet none of this has the power to diminish you, unless you give it permission. When you reclaim that permission, when you decide that your worth is untouchable, you step into a freedom that illusions can no longer chain. And that freedom is the quiet birth of an inner empire, invisible to the eyes of others, but unshakable within you. The journey toward this kind of awakening is not glamorous. It is not the dramatic triumphs shown in films or the grand proclamations shouted from stages. Instead, it unfolds in the small, silent choices you make each day, choosing to walk away rather than beg for scraps of affection, choosing to rest in solitude rather than lose yourself in empty company, choosing to believe your inner voice when the world falls silent. These choices may seem ordinary, but they carry the weight of a revolution. They declare, without words, that you will not live as a shadow chasing illusions, but as a soul rooted in its own truth. Over time, these choices carve a new path through your life, one where disappointment no longer destroys you, where betrayal no longer defines you, and where silence no longer frightens you. You become whole, not because others complete you, but because you complete yourself. In this wholeness, love itself takes on a different shape. You stop seeking relationships to patch holes within you and start approaching them from a place of abundance. You realize that true love, if it is to exist, cannot be a cage of dependency, but must be a meeting of two free souls. The illusions Schopenhauer warned against dissolve when you embrace this truth. You do not need to be chosen to be valuable. You do not need to be admired to be worthy, and you do not need to be understood by everyone to be real. Love, then, becomes an offering rather than a demand, an expression of fullness rather than a desperate hunger. This is why inner transformation is the only real revolution, because without it, every relationship is built on fragile illusions, but with it, you carry a foundation that nothing can shatter. The call that emerges from this understanding is not loud. It does not urge you to conquer others, to prove your worth in the marketplace of attention, or to broadcast your pain for applause. Instead, it calls you to a quieter strength. The strength of standing alone without fear. The strength of carrying your scars as wisdom. The strength of walking away from illusions without regret. This is the kind of revolution that cannot be seen from the outside, because it happens in silence, in solitude, in the moments no one else witnesses. And yet, it is precisely this kind of revolution that changes everything, for when you no longer need validation, you are no longer controlled by it. When you no longer crave illusions, you are no longer deceived by them. And in that freedom, your life takes on a dignity that cannot be stolen. So you return to the beginning, to the controversy that started it all, and you see it differently now. Schopenhauer's words were not the end, but an invitation, an opening into reflection. They remind you not to cling to fantasies that betray you, not to expect eternity from what is temporary, not to mistake conditions for unconditional love. The real revolution is not in changing others, but in transforming yourself. It is in standing quietly in your own light, even when the world does not recognize it. It is in carrying silence with peace, solitude with strength, and scars with pride. The call to action is not to fight louder, but to live deeper, to let go of illusions, to embrace truth, and to walk forward with a soul unshaken by shadows. And perhaps that is the most empowering message of all, that the revolution you have been waiting for has always been within you, waiting in silence for you to begin.